Want to have a drink of water before.
Okay.
I'm rolling.
So let's do something easy right off the top. What was the most memorable thing about being down in the desert?
Well, of course, the most memorable thing at Trinity was the shot itself, a tremendous explosion, largest explosion in the world up to that point, equivalent to 20,000 tons of high explosive. And it was awesome and beautiful at the same time. And of course, the successful culmination of tremendously large number of man hours on the part of everybody, billions of dollars. So that was an exciting moment.
What was the thing you hated the most about being down in the desert there?
Well, as a matter of fact, I did not hate it. It was perhaps the fact that we were to stay there and not leave, and very often we'd be there a week or more at a time without leaving. So that was a little tough, but we were also working very hard. We were working late into the nights very often, and so we didn't have much time to concern ourselves about other problems or other people. So it was, I look back on it as an exciting time, and I don't think of those kinds of problems we had down there. It wasn't the greatest of living conditions, but still I really, been my first experience on the New Mexico desert, and it was, I found the place fascinating, and the animal life, plant life, and it was, and what ranch life must have been down there. We sort of experienced that. But
Tell me a little bit, maybe we should start talking about some of that. I mean, you got down there. What's the first thing you saw or felt or smelled or thought of, or, you know, some of those kinds of initial...
well, the first thing is the lack of good roads in there. We drove mostly four-wheel drive vehicles and very often needed them. And the roads were used enough, they were ground into a powder, and you'd drive in from the highway, and by the time you got to base camp, if you were in a weapons carrier or a Jeep, you were completely covered with this whitish alkaline dust, and a little tough on the breathing too. So that was impressive, but the Jornada del Muerto, so-called, was a very flat valley there that was with yucca plants, and it was a beautiful area, really. So that was impressive, and then getting to the McDonald Ranch, which was base camp, was that was a little bleak. We didn't have much there. It was a few buildings hauled in from Albuquerque, barracks buildings, and well, it's really barracks buildings, and one barracks building been turned into our mess hall. But our photographic group under Julian Mack had somehow been able to get the ranch house itself for our headquarters and lab, and that was the best facility on the ranch there. So we lucked out, and but we had to process some film, and so we had a dark room and loading rooms for our cameras and so forth. But we had the best facility on base.
Now, so the barracks and everything were right there at McDonald House?
Yes, right close by, yeah.
So what was down at Mockingbird Gap? Was there something down there?
No, Mockingbird Gap was a gap between the Sierra Oscuros and San Andreas, and there was a road through there that ended up on a highway near Three Rivers, as I recall. Pretty remote.
Well, let's pull this picture up here. There you are with the thing, but where's that?
Yeah, this is base camp, and This is pictures taken from a second windmill tower. There are two, you see a windmill in this picture, but there were two windmills there. And I think I took this picture. I can't be certain of that, but after all, it's 50 years ago. But yeah, here we have the original ranch buildings. One or two of them are adobe buildings. The ranch house, the McDonald Ranch House, is a wood frame building. And I was down there again 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and the ranch building is just about gone. The roof was blown off and deteriorated badly since these days. But the other buildings are all brought in from Albuquerque, and they're very temporary wooden buildings. I understand they were CCC buildings in the 30s even, so they were old at that time. But it was able to throw them up quickly and make provisions for the group.
When did you get down there? How much lead time before the actual detonation?
Well, I can't remember exactly. Detonation occurred in July, and I remember I was there when President Roosevelt died in April, and must have got there in February or March of that year, of 45. And we got there before all the construction was complete. The tower wasn't up yet, the shot tower, and the roads had not been completed. They finally did blacktop some of the roads, the important roads. So I was there, we were there quite early, and the MPs were there with their horses. They manned the gates coming into the range, and they rode patrols around the area on their horses. They also played polo. Lieutenant Bush, who was their officer, was a former cavalry officer, and he really enjoyed polo, which the MPs played down there on occasion.
What did you think of let's back up just a little bit. What did you think of the landscape? What did you think of the dryness? What did you think of this environment? I mean, you had snakes around, and you said something about some guy was collecting crawdads, and
There were a lot of snakes, rattlesnakes, and although I say a lot, I don't remember anyone being bitten by a rattlesnake. People had snake bite kits and that sort of thing, but we wandered around that desert quite a bit, and I encountered snakes. In fact, one day I was out with Dr. Bainbridge, who was our test director, and we had discovered an old mine way out in the boonies, and were talking to him about it, and he was real interested in the mines around there. So he wanted to go out there, and I took him out in the Jeep, and it was in the morning, and we got out of the Jeep and were looking at the mine and the tails pile there, the tailings, and as we were talking, a rattlesnake rattled right at our feet. I mean, it was cold in the morning, fortunately. He didn't strike. But both Bainbridge and I jumped about 6 feet straight up in the air. But
you had that picture of the rattlesnake.
I think that's the one that I took a picture of then, yes, yeah. But there were many mines in that area, and this one was beautiful in that it was a vertical shaft, and after you went down a few feet, the walls of this thing were pure crystalline quartz. All around were these quartz crystals, and anywhere you shine the light, you get multiple reflections and beautiful. They were small crystals, but there were millions of them. Somebody had been mining metals there. I don't know what kind, but yeah, it was a vertical shaft with drifts. That was an interesting place, and Bainbridge was, as I say, was quite interested in the mines around there.
Let's stop for a second. I'm sorry. Tell me about the guy who collected snakes.
Oh, Ernie Wallace, who was also in our photographic group, and did a lot of the still photography down there, as well as motion picture photography, and he was helping with the technical cameras also. But Ernie was real interested in snakes, and we had caught a couple of them, and but let them go again. And but Ernie wanted to keep some, so he built or found a box that he tied down in the back of his Jeep, the Jeep that he normally drove. And that was his snake box, and he had a forked stick and another stick with a loop on the end of it that he could operate from the handle, so he could tie down the snake with his forked stick or pin it to the ground and then put the loop over its head, and which he could pull tight from a distance, and he'd drop the snake in his box. And after coming back to base camp, he'd put it in a permanent cage, and he had a lot of snakes in there. I can't tell you how many, but he had quite a few. And and one night, somehow the snakes got out. I don't know how that happened, but and the next morning there were snakes crawling all over that camp and scared the hell out of a lot of people there. And Captain Bush, who, or at that time he was Lieutenant Bush, but he was sort of the military leader down there. And he came around and told Ernie in no uncertain terms to get rid of those snakes and not gather anymore. So that was the end of Ernie's snake project.
Tell me, go to your medium, please. Tell me about crawdads.
Now,
Didn't you tell me the
no, I don't remember any crawdad stories. I have read that on the morning of the 16th that there was a pond somewhere near
Oh,
base camp where
maybe it was Phil Owens then who told me.
you
You
know,
can turn off for a second. And go. Just describe the landscape that you saw and what you thought about it when you got down there.
well, the land, as I have said, it was quite flat in this valley. It was ringed with mountain ranges, and the grass was, I think, to a cattleman, it was pretty good grass land, and it was a very flat valley, and the grass was high enough to be a beautiful tan color, and it was very impressive. Yucca bushes everywhere, and
Being from Minnesota, what did you think about it?
yeah, being from Minnesota, I was very impressed, and I really enjoyed the desert down there. It was, to me, had its own kind of beauty, and it was indeed a great place. Didn't have much time to enjoy it. We were pretty busy, but we had our times when we could get in the vehicle and go out and examine the area. And as I say, we found mines, and we found great herds of antelope, and there were some wild burros in the area even. And all of this was pretty interesting to someone from Minnesota. So it was great in that respect.
Tell me about the job you had to do down there.
Well, the job was, I had by that time been a technician for the technical photographic group at Los Alamos, and had done a lot of different photographic things up there. I'd done some documentary photography with 35 millimeter motion picture camera, and had done some high speed, had learned how to use the very high speed Fastax cameras, which took several thousand pictures per second, and had been involved with the fabrication of some oscilloscope cameras, which were very new at that time, and these were used to photograph the face of an oscilloscope with fast transient electronic signals on it. The only way to really record a fast electronic signal in those days. and got involved with the shops, the machine shops, fabricating camera parts and later fabricating equipment that we used at Trinity. So these were exciting times up at Los Alamos, and very interesting to a young kid from Minnesota. And it was in technical work that was. And most of us were interested in technical fields, and I had done optical things previously, and it was just in my field of work, and I really enjoyed it.
Okay, but tell me, down in Trinity, on the desert, going to blow this thing up, what were you supposed to do? What was your job?
Well, the day of Trinity I was to work at 6 Miles West Photo Station, and my boss, Dr. Julian Mack, was operating the turret that I've described to you, a airplane machine gun turret that had been converted to a camera turret. And we had, I think, 4 cameras with mostly long focal length lenses, and we were operating all of them at 100 pictures per second. That was pretty fast for a 35 millimeter camera in those days. And with these various focal length lenses, my boss knew that the ball of fire would, if this thing went anything other than a dud, we'd have a big ball of fire that would rise from the heat. And the turret was there so we could track it with the cameras. And so I was his assistant while he sat in the turret. As the announcement came at -5 seconds, I think it was, I turned on the Mitchell high-speed cameras. We wanted to conserve as much film as we could. And we had tested each of these cameras singly and made sure they all worked properly, and done that many times. But we had never really, as far as I know, we had never turned on all 4 of these big cameras at one time. And so at the proper moment, I turned them on, and Julian was operating the turret, as I say, and he followed. The explosion occurred, and that was an interesting, tremendous moment. Of course, a sight that one can never forget. And I stood there and I had a welder's mask just the glass from a welder's mask that I held up to my eyes. But shortly after the detonation, I took it away and was incredibly almost blinded by the light. And I said something like, "God, it's beautiful," as I looked at it. And Julian was driving the turret, and he came right back and said, "No, it's terrible." And this was really the first I'd ever heard anyone say anything like that. I think some of the physicists who were involved in the development of the bomb had started to worry about the moral implications of what they were doing, but certainly at my level, we never had any of those thoughts. We all worked as hard as we could to develop this bomb and get it completed, and hoped that it would end the war, which it did, of course.
Okay, let's back up just a little bit. I wanted you to kind of just define the parameters of why you and your photographic team were down there in Trinity. Not necessarily that specific job that you did, but I mean, really, what was the job of you being part of this team? What was the overall thing?
Yeah, the overall purpose of Trinity, of course, was to test the effectiveness of the implosion weapon, and there were a great number of measurements that were made there. There were tremendous effort in the area of radiation effects of the detonation, fallout from the radioactive cloud, seismic effects, earth motion effects. Air blast was a very big project. Of course, the earth motion and the air blast were the effects that were most important. And there were electronic methods of measuring the air blast and the earth motion. And we also had optical methods of, we had an experiment which I was involved in to make measurement of shock wave velocity across the desert. An optical technique, because even at that time it was thought that the huge electromagnetic pulse from the explosion itself might be large enough to mask a lot of the electronic measurements. An ordinary high explosive will produce an electromagnetic pulse, which gets into the cables and can hide small measurements that you're trying to make. And that was understood. And so it was felt, well, we ought to have a backup optical method of measuring shock wave velocity and some of the other effects. And I was involved in some of that. In fact, developed a shock wave switch that was a very simple thing, but that would, as the shock wave arrived at a particular
Less technical aspects.
Okay, I'm rolling.
Okay, cool. Tell me about being down at Trinity. What's your first reaction?
Well, the first reaction was really a relaxation. We'd been busy up there at the hill and busting our butts getting the job done, and here we were free to get a vehicle, and we're on our way to southern New Mexico. And while we weren't supposed to stop, we had very limited places we could stop to eat and fuel up. We, when there's one or two of us, we didn't pay much attention to that rule, and we stopped where we wanted to. And here was a bit of freedom. That we were in the military, and we were confined pretty much to Los Alamos, but it was great to get out. And that was one of the first experiences, really. Here we have all this freedom.
So yeah, that's right. I mean, you got out of Oak Ridge, wound up on the hills.
Yeah. Very strange circumstances. And now suddenly we have something where we're really got an interesting job to do, and we're more or less free. Well, I say maybe kind of less, because once we got to Trinity, we were locked in, except for a few occasions when we snuck out around the guard system and got to town.
So you went into Socorro?
No, we didn't go to Socorro. We went to, well, I wanted to go to White Sands, and one of my buddies was willing to go with me, so we set it up with the boss, that we were going out and work on one of the camera stations. We were going out to West 10,000, and we had to point the cameras at the tower, and we had the guys down there turn on the light so we could have something to get in the center of the frame of the camera, make sure we were properly pointed. So we had done some of that at night, and this particular night we said, hell with it, we're going to town. And so we got, and there was moonlight, and we got in the Jeep and took some extra gas, a couple of Blitz cans full of gas, and we drove out until we got about a mile from the guard station on the road where the MPs were, and they weren't to let us out. They were, everybody, all the GIs there were confined. But we turned off the lights and turned off the road and made about a 1 mile circle around this guard station. There was enough moonlight where we could see around the yucca bushes, and while we had a few little problems, we did indeed get past them. And they had a big generator to run the lights at the station, so they couldn't hear anything there, and we had known that. So we got out, and we went to, let's see, it was night, but we wound up in Las Cruces, and that's almost as far as Albuquerque from Trinity. And we had a couple of beers, and we weren't in uniform. We were in some old coveralls, and but there's no military establishment there. We just had a good time and came back. we had a little gas problem on the way. We decided we didn't have enough gas to get back. But we came to a road construction project. In those days, they had kerosene torches along the road. And these torches each had maybe a quart of kerosene in it. So we gathered up several of these, put out the torch, and dumped the kerosene in, mixed it with what gasoline we had left. We barely made it back to camp by, it was close to dawn when we got back. But we had beat the system and made it, so we felt good about that. Had to go to work right away.
Well, tell me about when you were going down there. You said you had some freedom. Like, did you stop at restaurants and get some real food, or what did you do?
Yeah, the first couple of trips, we were only supposed to stop at one place in Berlin. That's where we could eat, and we could get gas only in Albuquerque at a Corps of Engineers station. Forgotten where it was in Albuquerque, but we were pretty limited. And we had travel orders, very strange travel orders. If we were stopped by a policeman, these orders read from Bruns General Hospital, which was a Santa Fe General Hospital, military hospital, to Fort Bliss, Texas. So this was a fraudulent travel order, and never had to use it, never got stopped by a cop, but don't know what would have happened had we been stopped.
So what did you guys stop for lunch at some favorite?
Yeah, we had this one place, and the first few trips, that's where we stopped, but then as we were there several months, we found we could stop wherever we wanted, really, and normally there's no problem.
Sounds like you guys were willing to bend the rules a little bit in order to have some freedom.
Yes, indeed, we were. It was, well, there were a couple of us who had been in the Army long enough to know sort of the kinds of rules that you had to pay attention to, and those that you could bend a little, and we did that. I don't think we compromised the project or anything, but we did indeed bend the rules a bit.
Getting down there.
Michael? Okay,
So
I'm rolling.
tell me about, oh God, my brain dropped out.
You want to do the thing with the Bainbridge again, or what do you want to?
Yeah, just talk about some of your experiences, and you can certainly compact them. Being down there in this landscape, being a boy from Minnesota.
Yeah, here, parts of Trinity were so interesting. Here's this kid from Minnesota. I'm down there in this New Mexico desert where terrain is completely different than anything I'm used to, and well, it was pretty interesting. And the rattlesnakes were a subject that everyone talked about. No one ever got bit, as far as I know, by a rattlesnake down there. And as I've said, my friend collected them. And
Yeah, we don't know you said that, or because we start we're supposed to say this kook or any Wallace in our outfit, or whatever you want to say.
yeah, we had a young guy from Illinois in our outfit. He was a sergeant, and he did a lot of the photographic things that were to be done down there. But he had a strange characteristic. He wanted to gather up those snakes, which he did. He built a cage for them, put it right next to the photo building, and all the guys would come around and look at Ernie's snakes. And he had a collection box on the back of his Jeep, and he had special fork sticks and sticks with loops on the end, and so he got pretty proficient at collecting snakes. And he collected enough that it was really a menace. And one night they got out. I don't know whether the dog had anything to do with that, or a coyote, or what, but anyhow, the snakes got out, and they were all over base camp the next morning. Scared the hell out of a lot of people. And Lieutenant Bush came around to Ernie and told him in no uncertain terms, many of which I couldn't say here, that he had to get rid of those snakes, which he did. And that was the end of Ernie's snake gathering project.
Tell me about being there and the kind of anticipation you might have had about what was going to happen.
Yeah, as to the big event, which was going to happen soon, we were all pretty excited about that too, and there were all kinds of rumors around camp about what was going to happen, and there was even a rumor that this bomb was going to light the atmosphere on fire and destroy the Earth, essentially. Scared the hell out of the military guys there, all of us non-physicists, and so that was a big topic of discussion, and was denied by anybody in authority there. And turns out, in reading the book since then, that there was concern, and I think it was Teller was given, or was it Beta? One of the physicists spent a lot of time and finally determined that that was impossible.
What were you thinking about? What did you think was going to happen?
Well, I just didn't know. I knew it was going to be a big explosion, and in May we'd had a 100-ton shot. I think it was May. Yeah. May we had a 100-ton shot on a tower. It was a sort of a dry run for Trinity. And we stood at our 6-mile station and watched that 100 tons, and at 6 miles, I was very disappointed. That thing was just like a firecracker, even though it had been, I believe, the biggest HE explosion up to that moment. But at 6 miles, I was expecting something bigger than that. So the day of Trinity was absolutely incredible with the brightness of that explosion, and many times the brightness of sunlight. And so well, I didn't really know what to expect. And there were people there saying, well, it's probably going to go a few tons, and others 20,000, 40,000 tons were some of the guesses people were making. I wasn't privy to all of that, but some of the rumors were floating around among the GI technicians.
And what did you have to do there? I mean, not necessarily your specific job, but I mean, really, what was the photographic team, what was their mission?
Well, the photo team was to do all the, one of the big projects there, maybe the biggest, was the effort to gather data that photographically. The brightness would be an important factor in determining the yield, and the size of the fireball was an important factor that couldn't be measured any other way. So we were there to gather data that couldn't be gathered otherwise.
Well, tell me some of the specific things you did to get that data. What, the cameras, or this high speed, or?
Oh yeah, we had lots of instrumentation. We had all of it, well, not all, a lot of our 35, I think all of our 35 millimeter cameras were operating at 100 pictures a second. We had lots of 16 millimeter cameras that were operating at various speeds, from slow to very high speed. And the biggest problem was nobody knew how bright this thing was going to be. How do you set the aperture of your camera? Or how do you set the speed of framing rate of your camera? And these were problems. The only thing we could do, our bosses had decided, well, we're going to have at least 3 sets of cameras. We're going to have one set for a dud that won't put out much light. We'll have one set for a medium-sized event, and one set for the very highest yields. And that's really what we did. We had lots of cameras. I have been involved in atmospheric shots at the Nevada test site since then, and I think Trinity had more cameras, more photographic instrumentation than any of the events since then. It was really well instrumented, and we were there months beforehand setting up. We had spectrographs. We had a spectrograph, a Hilger spectrograph built in England, and we had it operating at West 10,000. We had pinhole cameras. We had a few still cameras, ordinary still cameras, and we had...
Excuse me. Let's back up, because you hit something I really liked. I mean, don't let it go away. And Julian Mack even had a pinhole camera, the strangest thing.
He had a pinhole camera, the basic
I'm sorry, let's
Okay,
start over.
yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, we even had a pinhole camera. We had every kind of camera, and our boss, Dr. Mack, had decided he wanted a pinhole picture. We built a camera with we had a real thin sheet of brass. We put a tiny pinhole in it, and we had a sheet of film in the focal plane, which was 40 inches long and at least a foot wide, and I should say long. That was in height. We had 40 inches high, so we could, if the fireball was bright and rose rapidly, we'd get a image of it. And you've seen the picture of it. It's reasonably spectacular, I think. Nothing like the motion picture coverage, but it was a very worthwhile project. And we also had Julian had a guy at the Mount Wilson Observatory build a thermopile, which I was concerned about the temperature the fireball would be, and it's a very difficult thing to measure. So we put this, the idea was to put this thermopile, which is just a whole series of thermocouples, into a very tiny wire, and we put it in the focal plane of a lens, a fixed lens that would look at the tower, and it was felt that the temperature of the explosion of the ball of fire could be measured with this. And the boss sent me to Albuquerque to meet Dr. Edison Pettit, was his name, a guy that was well known for his ability to build these very difficult thermopiles. And I went to Albuquerque to meet the super chief and meet Edison Pettit, who would be on that, and he'd have a package for us, which I did. I had no idea what Edison Pettit looked like, but I went to the Santa Fe station in Albuquerque, and a few people got off, and one gentleman there, an older guy with a box in his arms, and I just decided that's got to be Dr. Edison Pettit, and sure enough it was. And so I gathered the package from him, and he had a lot of questions which I couldn't answer for him. He wanted to know what that was really going to be used for and where, and I couldn't tell him these things, but said my goodbyes, put it in the vehicle, and took off for Trinity. That was an interesting, and I do not remember what results we got from that, but it was a unique experiment there.
Okay. Let's stop for a second.
Okay.
In more layman's terms, what was the most unique piece of equipment? I'm referring to the pinhole.
Yeah. Well, one of the most interesting photographic gadgets we had was a pinhole camera. Our boss, Julian Mack, insisted that we have a pinhole camera. And just why he wanted to do this, I'm not sure. But he had his way, and at West 10,000, we put in his design of a pinhole camera, which had a piece of film in the focal plane. It was 40 inches long, and I think at least a foot wide. As I recall, it was the biggest piece of film that Kodak could make for us in those days. And it was a high-speed film, which it really didn't need to be because we overexposed it to a large degree. But the picture was really quite good. It provided some good data, and Julian was very proud of it. I remember that.
Tell me more about some of the cameras you say you had some pretty high-speed stuff. You had some special cameras.
Yeah, I think it was 1,000 yards west. We had a camera station encased in lead because of the ionizing radiation that would be present that close in. We wanted to protect the film from that kind of gamma radiation that would blacken it. So we had 13 inches of lead all around this station. We had 4 Fastax cameras, which had been requisitioned and purchased from Western Electric. It was a unique camera in those days. It would take up to 10,000 pictures a second. Now this is really high-speed photography. And we had used those at Los Alamos for primarily pictures of explosions in the development of the various parts of the bomb. So we were familiar with them and took them down to Trinity, built this special container with, encased them all in lead, and they looked through a special leaded glass that I understand was made in Belgium, of all places. But we had 13 inches of this leaded glass, was also called X-ray glass, and the cameras looked straight up rather than looking at the tower, because the prompt radiation from the explosion would have gone through that glass and blackened the film. So the cameras looked up through this shelter, and we had mirrors on top that essentially pointed the cameras at the cab on the top of the tower. And we had buried in the ground beside it, we had 6 and 12 volt car batteries that were series together to provide 200 volts of direct current. And these were 100 volt, essentially 100 volt motors. So these cameras were going at their top rate. And they indeed got very good pictures. The film was blackened to some degree from the ionizing radiation, but the lead protection was pretty good.
Are those now those thin strips of photos that we see printed with the emerging gas bubble?
Right,
And then you have a
exactly.
little bit of some of the signal towers.
Exactly, yeah. The signal towers we didn't think about, but as the fireball grew,